Chapter 2731. Lan Yu realized that Qin Shun was a cold person, but she wasn't without weaknesses. For example, Qin Shun was especially gluttonous. In the past, Qin Shun gave him the impression that she was cold. The cost of a cup of coffee was 10 to 20,000, and the cups and utensils were hundreds of thousands. Her life was extremely extravagant. But now, he realized that Qin Shun wasn't picky at all at work. As long as it tasted good, she couldn't refuse it. Of course, this small weakness also made her very cute. Lan Yu felt happy again. He tilted his head and watched her open a bag of buns. He didn't care about the heat and ate one. Lan Yu asked softly, "Have you brushed your teeth?" Qin Shun looked at him with a rare look of confusion in her eyes. "I'm so hungry, and you're asking me if I brush my teeth?" He smiled and watched her continue to eat. While she was eating, he said, "You were so tired last night. Why did you still go to look after Zhou Chengwang?" Qin Shun looked at him. "Because my heart aches for Qin Mu, but my heart aches for you too." Lan Yu watched as she finished one and tactfully handed her another one. Qin Shun took a bite and looked at him. She said calmly, "Then will you look after him tonight?" He agreed without even thinking about it. It was not difficult to talk about this matter. After all, there were nurses who were not good at it. But from that day on, he really accompanied Zhou Chengwang every day. He accompanied Zhou Chengwang the whole day when he didn't wake up at all. In fact, he had a question in his heart. Was he so stupid when he was lying in the hospital? Zhou Chengwang woke up 3 days later. That day, his fingers moved. Lan Yu was the most excited in the world. He finally didn't have to accompany a man every night. Although he used to like Qin Shun and thought he was a man, he really didn't have any feelings for Zhou Chengwang. Later, he thought, why didn't Zhao Zi come? He was fooled by Qin Shun. Even so, Lan Yu couldn't get angry. The more he thought about it, the more stupid he felt. He was the one who drug her. It was normal for her to be angry. However, he had not seen Qin Shun for several days, and he missed him a little. At this moment, Zhou Chengwang woke up and almost immediately ran to find Qin Shun. Qin Shun was in the office. Qin Mu had fallen asleep, so she was drinking coffee in the office. At this time, it was already 1 o'clock at night. Zhou Chengwang swallowed the words he was about to say and asked in a low voice, "Why aren't you sleeping?" Qin Shun looked up at him and said calmly, "I don't have the habit of sleeping with women." Even if she was his younger sister, she still couldn't do it. He felt that it was a little strange. Lan Yu's eyes lit up. How could Qin Shun not know what he was thinking? He sneered, "You don't have the habit of sleeping with men either." No matter how good Lan Yu's temper was, it was a little worn out. He said angrily, "Then when you have sex, you always have the habit of doing it with men, right?" Qin Shun's eyes were fixed on him. He thought she was going to be shy, but Qin Shun said slowly, "That night, I didn't feel anything, so I don't have any problems in this area for the time being." Lan Yu went forward, took the coffee from her hand, and drank it for her. Qin Shun just sat there and looked at him quietly. Lan Yu lowered his head and squinted at her overly beautiful face. He murmured, "You make me feel like I've been a fool for the past few days. Now that you know, you're not too stupid." Qin Shun was still unmoved. Lan Yu narrowed his eyes and sneered, "Really?" Chapter 2732. Stop finding excuses for your beast, Jade. Qin Shun smirked. "Lan Yu, you're the one who didn't want it. I changed my mind." He held her waist with one hand and pulled her towards him, making her feel that he couldn't wait to do it. Qin Shun's face was a little red. He struggled a little and said very softly, probably because he was afraid of waking up Qin Mu, "You're crazy. If you want to do it, go somewhere else. If you come with me, I'll do it somewhere else." He stared at her. "Find an empty ward, HM?" He leaned forward and bit a piece of soft flesh behind Qin Shun's ear. He murmured, "Dr. Qin, haven't you always wanted to do it with your patient?" He moved closer to her ear shamelessly and continued, "What were you thinking when you held my thing in the past? Were you hoping that it would love you? HM?" Qin Shun narrowed his eyes. "Mr. Lan, as a vegetable, you're thinking too much. My thing woke up because of you. You're responsible for it," he said shamelessly and took her hand, doing whatever he wanted. Qin Shun frowned and was about to push him away when the door to the lounge opened. Qin Mu stood there with her long hair down. She looked very tired. "What you guys doing?" God. Lan Yu's thing immediately went into a vegetative state. His expression was a little ugly, and he gritted his teeth. If this happens a few more times, it's going to be wasted. Qin Shin smiled and turned to look at Qin Mu. But she turned back and looked at Lan Yu, who had a dark expression. "Oh yeah, why are you here?" He couldn't have really come to look for her in the middle of the night. Could he? Lan Yu's mind went blank. He then coughed lightly. "It's... Zhou Chengwang is awake." Qin Shin glanced at him, pushed him aside, and walked toward the VIP ward. Qin Mu also jogged over, but when she passed by Lan Yu, she blushed. "Thank you and good luck." Qin Shun is a bit hard to chase. Now, everyone in the Qin family who knew about this matter sympathized with Lan Yu. His taste was too unique. Lan Yu was slightly encouraged. He suddenly felt that Zhou Chengwang's little wife was very cute. Along with it, Zhou Chengwang was also very cute. He followed behind Qin Mu and entered the ward together. Zhou Chengwang woke up, but he could only move slightly, and his eyes were temporarily blind. When Qin Mu went over, he immediately grabbed his hand. "Chengwang." Zhou Chengwang looked in the direction of the voice, but there was still darkness in front of him. He calmly accepted all this, because if there was a price to pay for Mumu's return, he would rather be the one to bear it. Qin Mu held his hand and put it on her face. Her voice was a little trembling. "Does it still hurt?" "It doesn't hurt much." He shook his head, and then moved his head as if he was looking at something. "What time is it now? And where am I?" "At Xingyuan Hospital. It's 1:00 in the evening." Qin Mu whispered with tears in her eyes. It was great that he was awake. As long as he was awake, it would be good. Zhou Chengguang was silent for a while before he said in a low voice, "Will I never be able to see again?" "No, it's just temporary blindness. It'll be fine when the blood clot disappears," Qin Mu whispered. "And your face is fine. It's still very beautiful." Zhou Chengguang smiled. "You're much better at comforting people than before." Qin Mu nodded and then put her face on his waist. "Chengguang, I'm very happy." Chapter 2733. Zhou Chengguang was in pain, but this pain was the pain of happiness. He couldn't make a sound, so he let his wife lie in his arms. His senses were not very sensitive, but he could smell her scent. Probably because he couldn't see, his nose was particularly sensitive. It was the smell of his Mumu. He gently stroked her long hair and said in a low voice, "Mumu, I won't run away from you in the future. Okay." This life was here. Whether he was good or bad, they had been together. Qin Mu nodded hard in his arms. "Okay, I won't leave you again." He couldn't see her, so he searched for her little face and pinched her nose. "If I don't see you in the future, can you only post a missing person notice instead of a dog notice?" Qin Mu looked up at him, then lay down and said in a low voice, "Zhou Chengguang, I actually have a reason." He waited for her to continue. "Because sometimes men are as cheap as dogs." She said it very quickly, without any psychological pressure at all. The reaction she got from Zhou Chengguang was that he had fainted. It wasn't because he had fainted, but because he was really too weak and had only been awake for a short while. Qin Shun, on the other hand, was enjoying the show from the side. He waited for Qin Mu to move aside with a red face before letting Zhou Chengguang examine him. "Qin Mu, there's good news." She whispered, "There's also bad news. Which one do you want to hear first?" Qin Mu looked at her. "The good news." Qin Shin took off his gloves and looked at her seriously. "The good news is that the source of Zhou Chengguang's liver has been found. It's from a small country and will arrive in a day. However, the bad news is that Zhou Chengguang's current body is not suitable for a transplant, but we don't know when the next source of liver will be, and his body can only last for 2 months at most." Although it was cruel, Qin Shin still let her make the decision. Qin Mu was stunned. Looking at Zhou Chengguang's sleeping handsome face, she felt a little complicated. She knew that this was a rare opportunity, but if his body couldn't take it, he might never wake up. "Let me think about it, okay?" Qin Mu's voice was very low. Qin Shin nodded and ordered the nurse to give Zhou Chengguang an intravenous drip. When only Qin Mu and Zhou Chengguang were in the ward, she stayed by his side until dawn. She looked at him and said softly, "If you didn't save me, You would have survived, wouldn't you? Zhou Chengwang, I don't feel guilty because I believe that you will survive, because you can't bear to leave me alone, right? She reached out and held his hand, her voice very soft. When Zhou Chengwang woke up again, it was 10 in the morning. As soon as he woke up, he grabbed Qin Mu's hand. Her voice was very soft. Chengwang, are you hungry? Qin Shun said that you can eat something liquid. Zhou Chengwang was calm. After a long time, he said in a low and hoarse voice, he is so kind. I thought he wanted to kill me. Qin Mu laughed, and there was a touch of tears in her eyes. How could you be so bad? She is not bad. It's me who let you down. Zhou Chengwang held her little hand, his voice even lower. Qin Mu, I'm sorry. I really want to give myself to you and then take care of you, but now I'm dragging you down. Chapter 2734. That's a good idea. She wanted to cry again. Zhou Chengwang, don't worry. I'll think about how to torture you every day, so you don't have to feel guilty. Just tremble. He coughed and then laughed. It seems that you become a lot naughtier after I slept. If you sleep again, I'll change back. If you don't believe me, you can try. Qin Mu lowered her head and kissed him. He smiled faintly again. His fingers were always holding hers, unwilling to let go. After a long time, he said in a low voice, Mu, I will live. Because there was no point in using his life to repay her. Yes, I believe you. She also smiled. In the morning light, they stared at each other. Even if he couldn't see, he could accurately capture her. When the liver came, Qin Shun immediately operated on Zhou Chengwang. Sometimes it was very cruel. The liver didn't wait for people. If you didn't want it, a lot of people would line up behind you. The operation was very big, and Zhou Chengwang's body was very weak, so it lasted for about 15 or 16 hours. He was notified of the critical condition and came out 3 times. Qin Mu didn't go in because he said that he would come out alive. He had lied to her so many times, but this time, she chose to believe him again. If he said that he would live, he would live. From early morning until 3 o'clock at night, Qin Shun finally came out. The operation went very smoothly. There will be a month of rejection period. Also, his body is too weak, and he can die at any time. It all depends on his will. After Qin Shun finished speaking, he returned to the operating room. Since it was Zhou Chengwang, she was the one who personally took care of the stitches after the surgery. Even the stitches were done beautifully. After a few days, the incision should not be able to be seen clearly. This was all because of Qin Mu's happiness. Zhou Chengwang was pushed to the ICU, and Qin Mu could only watch from afar. There won't be any danger for the time being. Go back and sleep. Qin Shun placed his hand on her lower abdomen. Be good. I want to be with him, Qin Mu said in a low voice. Qin Shun has been lonely for a long time. Qin Shun nodded. If you're tired, you can lie down on the bench for a while. Let Cher accompany you. Snow, who was at the side, had already prepared the blankets. She carefully laid them out for Qin Mu. After she was done, she looked at Yi Muyun eagerly, as if begging for praise. Yi Muyun smiled and reached out to rub her little head. All right, I'll get someone to bring 2 beds over. You stay with Qin Mu. Cher raised her head. One is enough. Yi Muyun knocked her head. The other one is for me. He added, You're already so old, but you're still so stupid. You should be glad that I fell in love with you when I was 10. Otherwise, you'll probably have a hard time getting married. You're so overbearing. I think you're the one who can't get married. Having lived the life of an old married couple, Snow had learned to talk back. However, when she talked back, she was always lacking in confidence, and the words were always left in her mouth. As they talked, the people around them were not surprised. Anyway, Mr. Yi had bullied Cher since they were young. He kept saying that Cher couldn't get married. He had been watching her like a wolf. It would be a miracle if Cher could get married. Yi Muyun glared at his little wife. She was really becoming less and less afraid of him. Cher made a face at him. Chapter 2735. Qin Shun made some arrangements, and the people slowly dispersed. Only Cher and Qin Mu were left to lie down together because they were really exhausted. Yi Muyun leaned against the bed, and he could see Zhou Chengwang well from this angle. Perhaps it was because he was getting older, but he slowly felt that he was a little cruel to Zhou Chengwang back then. If he hadn't been so radical, Zhou Chengwang might have been a pianist like Zhao Yin and lived a very simple life. But if he hadn't been like that, it seemed that Qin Mu and Zhou Chengwang wouldn't have had much interaction. After thinking about it for a while, he laughed at himself. Zhao Zi, he didn't leave. He kept standing there. After a while, Cher raised her head and suggested to her husband enthusiastically, "Brother, do you want to sleep in the same bed with Zhao Zi?" Her brother gave her a hard look. Cher was so scared that she shrank her head back. Zhao Zi looked at the two of them and shook his head with a smile. Back then, Cher had left for 8 years. Who would have thought that one day, the two of them would have such a good time again? So, Chongwang, get better. After you get better, you and Qin Mu can be as happy as them. Although Yimyun glared at his wife, he suggested to Zhao Zi in a gentle voice, "There's a recliner over there." Zhao Zi didn't refuse. He went over to the other side to smoke a cigarette and lay down. Although they all had a place to rest, everyone couldn't sleep for the whole night. Cher comforted Qin Mu in a very soft voice for the whole night. Although Qin Mu was already very strong, she didn't want to disturb her little sister-in-law's nagging, because it would produce a sense of happiness. Yimyun listened to his wife's voice and found it a little funny, but he didn't interrupt her, because it was rare for her to find a chance to show off her sister-in-law's demeanor. She was really spoiled by him. She was already 27 or 28 years old, but she didn't look like an adult at all. Sometimes, when she wore clothes, she looked like a high school student. Of course, he liked it too, especially after showering at night. At dawn, Cher was tired, and so was her mouth. She fell into a deep sleep. Yi Muyun went to see Zhou Chongwang first, and Qin Shen happened to come over. After making sure that everything was fine, he forced Qin Mu to sleep in Qin Shen's office and took Cher away. During the day, he asked his parents to take care of him. Zhou Chongwang no longer had any relatives. He thought that he should have more courage to be with Qin Mu. This probably needed a lot of warmth. Zhao Zi was there as well. Everything was arranged by Yi Muyun. Zhao Zi was a little melancholic, but he also felt relieved. Chongwang, you have a family in the future. The family you hated, the family you refused to acknowledge, is now your home. After going through so much, he felt that the past was no longer important. Zhao Zi wanted to leave quietly. He needed some rest. However, he had only taken 2 steps when Zhou Chongwang's little secretary came over with a few sets of breakfast. He put his hands in his pockets and looked at the little girl. "Are you here to see Zhou Zhou?" The little secretary blushed slightly and nodded. "Yes." But she immediately shook her head. "No." As if she had gathered her courage, she said softly, "I'm also here to see Vice President Zhao." Zhao Zi's gaze was deep. "Our relationship is so good that you're here to see me. Are you still calling me Vice President Zhao?" As he said that, he took the breakfast from her hands and handed a few sets to Yi Muyun, leaving only 1 set for himself. Chapter 2736. Yi Muyun watched with interest. Cher also woke up in a daze. She watched the two enter the elevator and then looked at her husband. "Brother, Zhao Zi probably wants to date too. He's not young anymore." Yi Muyun pinched his wife's little face. "All right, you should go home and sleep." As he said that, he carried her horizontally. Cher bit the side of his neck. "A lot of people are watching. Yi Muyun, can you not be so high profile every time? It's as if you love me so much." Actually, he loved to bully her at home. His voice was a little hoarse. "Why don't I love you? You just don't love me." She pouted and then lowered her little face. "Every time I cry out in pain, you don't let me go." His face was a little red. This was something that was not harmonious between the husband and wife. Her body was very petite, and he had probably endured it for too long. In the past 2 years, his passion for her body had not decreased, but had become stronger. Thinking about it, a little girl who had been developed was much more interesting than being suppressed and bullied. He was addicted to it, but she was a little lazy and had poor physical strength. However, he was always able to deceive her, over and over again. It was mostly by his pretty face. Sometimes she didn't fall for it, and he could only use brute force. In the end, she cried so hard that in the end, he couldn't tell whether he was pressing down on his wife or his little daughter. He felt a little guilty, but later he would be excited. At this moment, his little wife complained. Mr. Yi kissed her little face. I won't touch you this week. He always doted on her. She was exhausted this week, and he had a lot of things to do. Cher bit her lip and snorted. Thank you, Mr. Yi. You seem to be a little dissatisfied with me. He smiled and reached out to press the elevator button. The elevator opened, but she didn't expect that Zhao Zi, who had left long ago, was still in the elevator. Moreover, he was kissing that little secretary, and they were just short of stripping each other's clothes. The scene was a little strange. On one side was a legitimate husband and wife, and on the other side was a boss and a little secretary. Cher let out a low cry and covered her eyes. Pretend we didn't see anything. You guys continue. After leaving, Yi Muyun chuckled. He finally let it go. Cher didn't understand and looked at her husband blankly. Yi Muyun knocked her little head. You're so stupid. I really don't know how you managed to catch up with me. You are clearly the one chasing after me. Cher hugged his arm. You mean Zhao Zi also likes Shinmu? You just noticed? Yi Muyun knocked on her little head and then seemed to be thinking, you're not too stupid after all. You hit me again. You even belittled me. Cher was displeased. Your punishment is to take the fire escape and carry me down. Mr. Yi looked at his little wife helplessly. Tang Cher, you are 28 years old this year. This is the 58th floor. Are you sure your husband's stamina is that good? Yes. She hugged his neck affectionately. Brother has the best stamina. He looked at her, and all his temper was gone. He went down one floor at a time. He was not in a hurry, as if he had a lifetime to carry her. Cher lay on his back, looking a little happy. She hugged him and trusted him with all her heart. Chapter 27:37. Yi Muyun was a little speechless. He turned his head and looked at his little wife. Do you think it's tiring? She stuck out her tongue, but still let him carry her. In fact, she was very light. If he wasn't in a hurry, it wouldn't be difficult for him to walk slowly. Recently, he had been a little busy, so Mr. Yi also wanted to please his little girl. They had been separated for 8 years, so it was not a big deal for him to spoil her now. He walked down step by step, and his little girl was behind him. She was mumbling behind him. Mr. Yi, who was busy every day, didn't find her annoying. He only felt that she was still the little yellow bun from back then. Thinking of this, he seemed to be able to smell her fragrance. Cher lay on his shoulder and said very softly, Brother, what do you like most about me? Favorite? I don't think I have any. He chuckled. Or do you think you have any good points? He pretended to be surprised. I didn't realize that. Cher shouted angrily behind him, but her little face also turned red. She lay on his shoulder and said very softly, Being liked by you is my biggest advantage. Yi Muyun paused for a moment, and his eyes softened. He patted her back with his big palm and said, Shameless little girl. Who said I like you? She lay on his back, bit her lip, and looked very happy. You just like me. You like me very much. Yi Muyun shook his head and smiled meaningfully. I finally found your good point. Cher, do you want to hear it? Really? She leaned over and kissed him on the lips. He grunted and then said very slowly, Isn't being cheeky your good point? Who can be more cheeky than you? Shui air squealed, while Yi Muyun's smile grew even more cheerful. When they returned home, Ishu went to school, and the little one at home was still sleeping. Therefore, Mr. Yi, who was busy every day, pinned his wife down in the bedroom and whipped her. Cher bit her lip and waved her little fist at him in protest. You said I'd rest for a few days. Her voice was tender and soft. How could he bear it? Hot sweat rolled down drop by drop, dripping on her pure white shoulders, scalding her to the point that she almost cried out in alarm. After a long time, Cher pushed his shoulder. Are you done? He kissed her and said affectionately, Bear with it a little longer. I've endured it for a long time. She poked his shoulder with her finger. Aren't all the men in the office big and round? Why do you have a six-pack? As she spoke, she playfully poked him with her little hand. Yi Muyun's eyes darkened. He grabbed her hands and pinned them to his sides. His voice was a little hoarse. Didn't you say you couldn't take it anymore? You still dare to provoke me? Cher looked at him eagerly. I didn't. He smiled. This little fool didn't know that she didn't need to do anything at all. She just needed to look at him with such innocent eyes. As long as she touched him a little, he would go crazy. About 2 hours later, he let her go. Snow fell asleep without a backbone and allowed him to clean her up inside and out. After the clouds dispersed and the rain stopped, the man's eyes were filled with gentleness. Yimyun leaned against the headboard and looked at his little wife sideways. Cher had given birth to 2 children, but she couldn't tell it all. Chapter 2738. A 28-year-old woman who looked no different from a 20-year-old. Of course, he liked her, even more than the 2 of them. After giving birth to the second child, the doctor said that her body was not suitable for another child, so he had a vasectomy. Of course, there was also some trouble later on. He didn't know which starlet came to his door and said that she was pregnant with his child. Firstly, he hadn't touched anyone, and secondly, he wouldn't be able to get pregnant even if he did. Of course, Cher trusted him blindly and didn't care about it all. Today, he had asked her about her strengths. Actually, stupidity was her biggest strength. He liked her more because she was stupid. At the thought of this, he kissed Cher and smiled happily. Silly. His little fool stretched out his hand and slapped it right onto his handsome face. She buried her face in the pillow. Brother, it hurts. His face, which had already darkened, silently broke into a smile. After a long time, he said in a low voice, "Sleep well, baby." And he was so excited that he couldn't sleep while watching over her. They had been reunited for 2 years, and he had hugged her to sleep every day, but his interest in her had never decreased. Xinyuan Hospital. Qinshan only slept for a while before she went to the ICU to check on Zhou Chengwang's condition. Everything is normal. She heaved a sigh of relief after checking the data. Then, she looked up and found Lan Yu behind her. She turned her head. "President Lan, is there nothing else to do in the hotel? Or is it going to close down? If you are really bored, you can go and paint. A place like a hospital is very boring. Other than white, there is only the ashes of death. I don't think you will like it. But I have you here." Lan Yu smiled. "I said that I want to pursue you. Have you forgotten? I also suggested that we stay in a physical relationship." Qin Shun said it naturally and didn't care that the nurses heard it. After all, she and Lan Yu had long lost their reputation. There were 4 young nurses at the side, and they all pricked up their ears to listen. At this moment, the 4 of them looked at each other, and their mouths were wide open. One body, one stage, one system. Yes, Dr. Qin said it himself, and the voice he heard that night was not wrong. They all looked at them. Qinshan glanced at the 4 young nurses. They lowered their heads and pretended to do all kinds of things. "Lan Yu, don't come to the hospital in the future. If you have something to say, go to my apartment and talk," she said softly. She really didn't want to be surrounded. She didn't forget that she was a man now, and it wouldn't be a pleasant experience to be pointed at all the time. Lan Yu had a trace of grievance on his face. "You didn't even go home." Qinshan looked at him and seemed to hesitate for a moment. Then he threw the key to the house to him. "Make one yourself and return it to me later." Lan Yu felt as if he had found a treasure. In fact, he had long regretted it. He had rejected Qin Chen's proposal at that time. He had the backbone to say that he was not a sexual man, but now he felt that he was. He would be crazy to refuse. Now, there was no doubt that the trap had hit him again. If he refused again, he was destined to have no sex for the rest of his life. Lan Yu took the key and left soon. The young nurse asked boldly, "Dr. Qin, are you really going to live with Mr. Lan?" Chapter 2739. Refuse? The young nurses looked at each other. How could Lan Yu refuse? He was drooling all over the floor. Then, the young nurses all held back their laughter. Qin Chen glanced at them, put his hands in his white robe, and slowly walked out. As soon as he left, the young nurses were in an uproar. First, they looked at Dr. Qin's back with infatuation. Oh my God, Dr. Qin has really been turned gay by Lan Yu. Think about it. The #1 Prince Charming of Shenyuan Hospital, just like that. He has become a little submissive. A young nurse held her face and wailed. Yes, I also think that Dr. Qin is a little submissive. Look at the expression on Lan Yu's face when he looks at Dr. Qin, and the expression on Dr. Qin's face when he looks at Lan Yu. It's different. Another young nurse analyzed very seriously. Lan Yu's eyes seem to be using his eyes to unbutton Dr. Chen's clothes, as if he is using his eyes to strip Dr. Chen naked on the spot. That's the level of desire. The third young nurse concluded. Dr. Chen is probably reluctant. Quite similar. The last young nurse sighed. It seems that the old saying is still useful. As long as you work hard, you can grind an iron pestle into a needle. Meanwhile, when Qin Shen walked back to his office, Qin Mu was still resting. She was indeed exhausted. Qin Shen brewed a cup of coffee for herself, and the aroma was overflowing and very fragrant. Her slender fingers held the coffee cup, and she took a sip, lightly tasting it. She slowly thought about herself and Lan Yu. When in B City, she didn't mind finding a companion. She was sure that Lan Yu would get tired of her after a while. No man would be willing to face a woman who was like a man every day. It might be fresh for a while, but he would get tired of it soon. What men liked was the feeling of being in control. Qin Shen lowered his head, looked at himself, and smiled. At this moment, the door was gently pushed open. She thought it was Lan Yu, so she didn't raise her head and said calmly, "Is the key ready?" However, there was no sound from the door. She looked up and saw an unfamiliar girl. "My name is Lin Cece." The girl smiled faintly at Qin Shen, looking a little shy and girl next door. Qin Shen frowned. She did not dare to think that this was a girl next door. If she guessed correctly, this was the daughter of the man under the scalpel. Did he still not give up by coming to her office? This was not a good experience for Qin Shen. She had been a man for a long time and had been admired by countless women, but she had never been troubled by it, because those women were purely admiring him and had never threatened him. However, although this girl was shy and timid, the power behind her was not something that Qin Shen could easily contend with. Although Qin Shen's expression was gentle, it was cold and indifferent. "Who are you looking for? What's the matter?" Lin Cece took a step forward with a sweet smile on her face. "The coffee smells so good." As she said that, she accurately told him the origin of the coffee and the steps to make it. Qin Shen was slightly surprised, but thinking that the person in front of him was also born with a golden spoon, it was not surprising that she knew these things, so he smiled faintly. "Do you want a cup?" Lin Cece nodded, but after a while, she asked worriedly, "Can I?" Qin Shen looked at her thoughtfully. "A cup of coffee is fine, but nothing else." Chapter 2740. However, Qin Shen had no intention of telling others about his private life, so he would just let her think that he was a lesbian. She brewed a cup of coffee for Lin Cece, and her movements were full of elegance. Of course, in her heart, she was also silently calculating when Lan Yu would return. Lin Cece walked to her side and looked up at Qin Shen, her face slightly red. "You cook better than me. I'll let you try mine another day." "Okay." Qin Shen smiled faintly. After pouring her a cup, he poured another one. Then, she looked up at the man who appeared at the door and looked at Lin Cece. "Miss Lin, you don't mind if I bring Mr. Lan Yu with me, right?" Lin Cece was taken aback. She turned her head and saw Lan Yu appear at the door of the office. He was holding a bunch of keys in his hand. Lan Yu was surprised at first, but he soon figured out who the person in front of him was. He looked at Qin Shen with a somewhat meaningful gaze. Then, he walked in slowly and returned the keys to Qin Shen. "I also got an extra key for your office. I can wait for you here during your surgery in the future." Qin Shen's eyes flickered slightly. Lan Yu could clearly see the displeasure in them. However, Qin Shen did not say anything. Instead, he smiled faintly and introduced Lan Yu to Lin Cece. "My boyfriend." Lin Cece's mouth was a little wide open, looking very shocked. Qin Shen walked over and naturally placed his hand on Lan Yu's shoulder. He smiled. "It's just like that. There are many now. You should know." He said it very naturally, misleading Lin Cece. She thought that she would give up. Lin Cece was shocked that Qin Shen would actually admit it so boldly. One had to know that the Qin family had a status in the business world. Moreover, Qin Shen was a genius in the medical world. Wasn't he afraid that it would affect his future by admitting that he was AG? Lin Cece sized up the G beside him. His looks were not bad, and he looked like an attacker. Her face was a little pale, and her smile was forced. Of course, Dr. Qin, you can bring Mr. Lanyu here. Qin Shin smiled and chatted with her for a while. After all, she was the daughter of that person. It was better not to offend her. The most important thing was to make her give up in a way that would not hurt her self-esteem. Lin Cece quickly left. Qin Shin had just closed the door and turned his head around when his body was firmly held down by Lanyu. Are you crazy? Qin Shun was helpless. I'm very tired. I don't have the strength to accompany you. Okay? Lanyu's eyes flashed with annoyance. He pressed his body against her and narrowed his eyes. You're using me again, huh? His fingers gently stroked Qin Shin's lips. How many guts do you have in your heart, huh? From a medical point of view, a human body, before Qin Shun could finish, he was kissed hard. This kiss was with a hint of punishment. He bit her lips maliciously, so hard that it almost bled. You know that I like you. Why do you still want to be a man? Is it fun to make others misunderstand? Let others think that I bullied you, pressed you down, and did that kind of thing to you behind your back. Does this kind of misunderstanding make you happy and feel a sense of accomplishment? Lanyu bit her ear, and his voice was hoarse. Qin Shin's body tensed up in an instant. Chapter 2741. The veins on Lanyu's forehead popped out, and he wanted to lose his temper. However, Qin Shin's expression was even colder than his. I will decide what kind of life I want to live. Lanyu, what makes you think that you can change my life just by sleeping with me? She pushed him away. As for using you, Mr. Lan can choose not to be used by me, right? Lanyu stared at her. You have no heart. Congratulations, you finally found out. Qin Shin curled his lips and slowly walked back to his seat, sitting down and making himself another cup of coffee. Naturally, Lanyu did not leave. He frowned and looked at the woman in front of him. She was elegant, sharp-tongued, good-looking and extravagant, and had countless flaws. Also, he forgot to mention that she was an ordinary woman. However, it was a little against his heart to say that. It didn't matter whether her body was flat or not. The lines were already perfect. There was a kind of person who was beautiful not in their skin, but in their bones. Qin Shun was this kind of person. It was 360 degrees. There were no blind spots, no matter which angle it was placed, and it was equally beautiful. Lanyu looked at her like that, and his anger disappeared. He pursed his lips. I didn't mean it that way. Then what did you mean? Qin Shin looked up, and there was even a faint smile in his eyes. In an instant, Lanyu felt flattered, and all the anger in his body disappeared. He went forward and took her cup. Drink less coffee. Don't make me angry. I don't need this. She snorted coldly and then looked at the cup that Lin Cece was holding. Throw this away. Lanyu was not surprised. Qin Shun had always been extravagant. It was nothing for him to throw away a cup that was worth tens of thousands. He looked at the cup in his hand and drank it in one gulp. Then he said, throw this away too. He had some dark thoughts in his heart. The cups were in pairs. So what if one was thrown away? Qin Shun did not say anything. Lanyu's throat was a little tight. I'll help you pick a set later. Seeing that Qin Shun didn't object, his heart softened a bit. He said in a low voice, I was too much just now. No matter what, he was the one who drugged Qin Shun and took her virginity by force. He said that Qin Shun used him, but he was the one who asked for it. He couldn't blame anyone else. Qin Shun looked at him and chuckled. Not bad. You know your limits. Lanyu walked over like a loyal dog, wagging his tail. I'm going to the office now. Go back early and rest. I'll cook for you tonight, okay? As he spoke, he frowned a little. It doesn't seem very convenient for Qin Mu to live at your place. Qin Shin's voice was very calm. After Zhou Chengwang is discharged, they will move back to the villa. For the time being, she will stay in my office, and then in the VIP ward. Lanyu kissed her lips in satisfaction. Qin Shin looked away. His voice was hoarse. But I prefer you to live at my place. Qin Shun did not say anything, and he did not force him. He went out first. After he left, Qin Mu came out of the lounge. Qin Shin looked at her. You heard everything? Qin Mu nodded. Are you and Lanyu for real? Qin Shin smiled. Just flirting. As she spoke, she reached out and touched her chin. It feels good. Qin Mu was shocked by her boldness. After thinking for a while, she asked, Are you interested in changing your flirting partner? Qin Shin chuckled. Not yet. Qin Mu felt a little sorry for Lan Yu. What kind of person was Qin Shun? If he liked her, he would have liked her long ago. Why would he wait until today? Chapter 2742. Qin Shun looked at Qin Mu, amused. What are you thinking about? Don't think that I'm toying with Lan Yu. I've never promised him anything, and neither has he. She felt no pressure in this relationship. It was as simple and easy as doing an experiment in the laboratory. Once they were tired of each other, they would naturally break up. Qin Shun felt that she was already being kind. She had already told Lan Yu that she would never fall in love with someone. Never. If he wanted to be together, they could only have a physical relationship. At most, they could live together. Nothing else. Qin Mu shook her head when she heard her words. I think Lan Yu is serious. Qin Shun looked at her without saying anything. That day, Zhou Chengwan's condition was quite stable. Qin Shun went back early. Perhaps what Qin Mu had said had an effect on her. By the time she got back, Lan Yu was still at work. She hadn't had a good bath for a long time. Hence, she took off her clothes and soaked in the warm water. Her body and mind were relaxed and comfortable. She raised her head slightly. Her clean and fair neck was beautiful. After a long time, she fell asleep in a daze. Suddenly, she felt a pain on her neck as though she had been bitten. Qin Shin chuckled softly. Ronglei, stop fooling around. Then, she opened her eyes. Her gaze was misty and her red lips were slightly parted. Her voice was soft and watery. He had never heard such a charm before. However, this charm did not belong to him. It belonged to a man named Ronglei. Lan Yu looked at her and asked softly, Who's Ronglei? At this moment, Qin Shun had already returned to his usual state. He smiled faintly and said, Someone I know. She looked at his eyes and added, Someone who's no longer around. Lan Yu's eyes narrowed slightly. There was a tinge of coldness in them. Someone who's no longer around. Did she mean for him to not be calculative? She couldn't even mention it. She could only think about it in her heart. Lan Yu's blood was boiling. His gaze fell on her body. Slowly, it became more intense. Qin Shin didn't move away. He lay on his back and gently soaked the hot water with one foot. He looked at him and asked, Do you want to bathe together? Lan Yu looked at her and said in a hoarse voice, Qin Shun, I can't tell which one is the real you now. But he still wanted her. After removing everything else, he lay down with her. He hugged her from behind and lightly kissed her from her shoulder to her neck, then to the back of her ear. He was not in a hurry, as though he had a lifetime to do this. But that was not the case with his body. It was obviously burning hot. Qin Shun leaned on his shoulder. Because of the heat, his face was tinged with a faint red, showing a rare sense of vulnerability. She smiled gently. Now, do you see it clearly? She grabbed his hand and led him to meet. Lan Yu's body tensed up. After a moment, he spat out angrily, Really? Then it was a storm. All of his unwillingness was contained in this beautiful event. Qin Shun was a person who was used to enjoying himself. Even this kind of thing was no exception, or maybe she was a doctor and knew the human body too well. Lan Yu had had women before, but the feeling with Qin Shun was completely different. He was embarrassed and even moaned in a low voice. His voice was very charming. It's even better than a woman's. Qin Shun kissed his chin and chuckled. She sat in his arms. They loved each other's body like a normal couple. His body was extremely happy, but Lan Yu was not satisfied. There were always some places that were different and incomplete. Chapter 2743. After that, Qin Shun got up. Instead of putting on a bathrobe, she changed into a pair of trousers and a beige shirt. The shirt was unbuttoned, so it didn't look out of place at all. Lan Yu also put on his clothes. Looking at Qin Shun, he couldn't help but recall the scene of them making love just now. He didn't mind her being average at all, but he still hoped that after they were done, even if it was just a bathrobe, there would be a chance for him to have an illusion that he didn't have sex with a man just now. However, in such a relationship, he didn't have the initiative, so he gave up on persuading her. He raised his hand and clasped Qin Shun's waist, saying calmly, I'm going to cook. You sleep for a while. I'm going to watch some DVD. I don't want to sleep for now. Qin Shun's tone was gentle, but there was a hint of alienation. Lan Yu thought that it was probably because Qin Shen wasn't used to it, so he didn't think much of it. He had brought the ingredients over. Now that he had sorted them out and planned for tonight's dinner, he began to cut them into pieces and slices from time to time. He would glance at Qin Shen in the living room, wanting to know what she was doing. Qin Shen was wearing a pair of trousers and a shirt, sitting elegantly on the sofa with a cup of coffee in her hand. She also lit up a cigarette, but she put it away after 2 puffs. Lan Yu looked at her quietly. He didn't know if it was because he was there or if she only smoked once or twice. He looked at her and thought that if he hadn't done it with her twice, he would really think that he was living with a man. Qin Shen's masculinity wasn't artificial at all. It was as if she was born with it, as if she was a man. A good-looking and elegant man. Lan Yu squeezed a glass of juice from the kitchen and placed it on the table in front of Qin Shen. "Drink this first." Qin Shen took a look and said gently, "I usually only drink coffee, red wine, or plain water. Thank you. Juice is better for the skin." Lan Yu's voice was very soft. As soon as he finished speaking, Qin Shen glanced at him. "You like women? You are a woman." Lan Yu also knew that he had angered her, so he pinched her face. "All right, I'll go pour you some water." He had only taken 2 steps when Qin Shen's voice came from behind him. "Lan Yu, you don't need to be so cautious. We are equals." Lan Yu didn't turn around. He just smiled and said, "I'm probably used to being a slave. When I see you, I'm like this." Usually, he wasn't like this. Honestly, he was quite cold to others, and he wasn't this enthusiastic. Maybe it was because when he woke up, he saw Qin Shen, and then he was tortured by her countless times, so he had an indescribable awe for her. Even when they were having sex, he would still listen to her feelings. He even served her like that. Qin Shen didn't refuse. She was a person who enjoyed it very much. What made Lan Yu a little disappointed was that Qin Shen didn't return the favor and didn't do it for him like that. However, he believed that one day she would take the initiative. He also found that although Qin Shen was cold, she also valued desire. To put it bluntly, she liked to have sex. This was probably the main reason why Lan Yu could stay by her side. The high and mighty Dr. Qin was naturally a little misophobic. How could she change men every 2 or 3 days? The safest and most useful one was probably him, Lan Yu. Chapter 2744. He used to cook for Cher, so he was very good at cooking. Qin Shen was quite satisfied with the meal, and Lan Yu felt that cooking was his secondary function. After eating, he was the one who cleaned up as usual. After everything was done, Qin Shen seemed to be ready to go to sleep. In order not to show that he was always thinking about that thing, Lan Yu endured in the living room for 2 more hours. When he went to the master bedroom to sleep, it was already 10 o'clock. He only turned on the night light and changed into his pajamas. When he lifted the quilt, he deliberately looked at her. Fortunately, Qin Shen slept in a bathrobe. Then, he couldn't take his eyes off her. Qin Shen looked very good in a bathrobe. Tonight, she wore a thin one that stuck to her body like a second layer of skin. The hem was only 10 centimeters above her knees. Her legs were very straight and long, and her neckline was slightly open. Everywhere it was seductive. Lan Yu's Adam's apple couldn't stop moving, and he felt his body burning again. After looking for a long time, he put down the quilt and lay down beside her. First, he lay flat, then turned sideways and looked at her. Unlike other women, Qin Shen didn't like to sleep on his pillow or nestling in his arms. Even sleeping was very cool. Poor Lan Yu. He couldn't fall asleep no matter how he tossed and turned. In the end, he really couldn't bear it anymore, so he wanted to kiss her. But before he could get close, Qin Shen turned over and turned her back to him. At this time, the bathrobe on her body was loosened, revealing half of her fair skin. In the end, he couldn't bear it anymore. He hugged her slender waist from behind and slowly moved in. His thin lips were on the side of her neck, and his hot breath was on her soft skin. "Qin Shen, do it again, okay?" Qin Shen vaguely grunted in acknowledgement. He nibbled on the back of her neck. "Say yes." She seemed to sober up a little. She reached out and pressed his naughty hand. After a while, she said in a low voice, "Only once, and don't be too rough." After saying that, she closed her eyes and did not move. Lan Yu hugged her and his body was very close to hers. While doing it, he bit her earlobe. You mean, he deliberately kissed her earlobe. You want me to do it from behind? Huh? Qin Shun was obviously more clear-headed now. His voice was intermittent. Up to you. How can you be so casual about this? He teased her as he enjoyed it. The half-asleep Qin Shun was much cuter than usual. He had always been very gentle, so even after a long time, she didn't say anything. She would occasionally respond, but most of the time, he knew that she was sleeping. Yes, she's sleeping. In the beginning, he could still endure it, but later, he couldn't. This kind of one-man show didn't feel good, so he became rough. Qin Shun finally woke up from her sleep. She raised her head and looked at the man whose face was a little twisted. She put her hand on his shoulder and said, I told you not to be too rough. Do it with me. Lan Yu bent down and kissed her. At first, Qin Shun was unwilling, but he still succeeded after a long time. She lay in his arms and sighed. I'm really tired. Lan Yu paused for a moment and turned on the light. Sure enough, she looked tired. He felt a little apologetic, and his voice was unbelievably gentle. If you don't want to do it, why don't you say it? Because I don't want you to be unhappy. Qin Shun closed her eyes again. Lan Yu, did I please you? Chapter 2745. Lan Yu kissed the corner of her lips. Silly. He hugged her and lay down quietly. He didn't come again. Although his body was still warm, he knew that she needed rest. Just like that, Qin Shun fell asleep. Lan Yu looked at her sleeping face for a long time. The next morning, Lan Yu had to go to the office, but Qin Shun didn't wake up. She was very casual when she slept, as though she liked to lie on her stomach. After he finished making breakfast, he walked into the bedroom and bent down to look at her. I'm going to work first. Breakfast is ready. I just need to heat it up. Qin Shun replied softly. Lan Yu smiled and kissed her forehead. He then got up and wanted to leave, but his neck was hugged by a pair of long arms. He lowered his head, and the person who was sleeping laughed softly and breathed at him. Lan Yu, I want you. Lan Yu was stunned. He stared at her, and after a while, he said stiffly, Chun Chun. Qin Shun opened her eyes and kissed his lips. What's wrong? Are you rushing to work? Lan Yu raised his hand and unbuttoned his shirt one by one. He said slowly, I'm off today. I'll give myself a day off to accompany you. But I might not have that much time to accompany you. Qin Shun pressed her lips against his and smiled. The way she smiled, and the feeling of superiority, made him want to conquer her. A person like Qin Shun was really admirable. Lan Yu had longed for a long time, and she finally fell to the dust. She was very open in bed, which made him extremely satisfied. He also thought that if he didn't know that he was her first man, he would think that she had a lot of experience. After doing it 3 times to his heart's content, Lan Yu felt a little exhausted. He saw Qin Shun get up and get dressed. He was a little surprised. Where are you going? Let's go to the hospital. Qin Shun patted his face. At that moment, Lan Yu felt like he was a gigolo, and Qin Shun was a sugar daddy. Thinking about it, it made sense. He was living in Qin Shun's house, so it didn't seem right for him to use and eat from her. Lan Yu frowned. Aren't you tired? Qin Shun had already put on his clothes. He smiled faintly. I'm not tired now. She bent down and kissed Lan Yu. If you're bored, you could go to work at the company. Lan Yu smiled bitterly and accepted his fate. However, he stopped Qin Shun, who was about to leave. Wait a minute. Walking in front of her, he took out a card from his wallet and placed it in her palm. Qin Shun lowered his head. What is this? Living expenses? Lan Yu hugged her and whispered in her ear, I'm a bit of a chauvinist. I'm not used to spending a woman's money and being supported by a woman. Qin Shun looked up at him. He reached out and wrapped his hand around hers. Be good. Listen to me. Qin Shun's eyes became misty. Then she smiled. It's been a long time since someone said these words to me. Lan Yu's expression changed slightly. He forced a smile. Then I'll say it to you every day from now on. That will make you look silly. Qin Shun also smiled. People who have been in a vegetative state are indeed different. He was still looking at her like that, which made her a little nervous. Hurry up and go. I'll come back to cook tonight, Lan Yu said in a low voice. Qin Shun looked at him and suddenly said, Lan Yu, I may go back to New York in 2 months. Chapter 2746. Qinshan waved the card in his hand and smiled. It's probably because you gave me this. Lan Yu pursed his lips and didn't say anything else. The atmosphere was a little subtle. After a long time, she sighed. I told you I won't stay for long. I won't force you. He murmured. If you want to go to New York, I'll accompany you. The Grand Hyatt Hotel also has a branch in New York. Qinshan wanted to say something, but he didn't. Lan Yu watched her leave with a deep look in his eyes. After a long time, he got dressed, stood in front of the French window, and smoked a cigarette. When he was with Qinshan, he could always feel that Qinshan was not in love. She had been drifting away and didn't intend to be with him for a long time. He knew that he shouldn't fall too deep, but he couldn't help it. There was a trace of pain on Lan Yu's face. He had her body, but never her heart. Her heart belonged to the man named Ron Lei. That was why he was so cold to others. Lan Yu smiled helplessly. At this moment, the phone in his pocket rang. He looked at it and saw that it was his mother's call. Ever since Lan Ting left and he woke up in the hospital, his relationship with his family had been tense. He took over the Grand Hyatt Hotel, but he didn't go back to the Lan family's mansion often. At this time, his mother's tone was very good, and she asked him to go back to the Lan family's mansion for dinner. Lan Yu thought for a moment and agreed. At noon, he called Qinshan and said that he would be back late at night. Qinshan nodded. Eat out by yourself. I'll bring you supper later. He talked to her in a coaxing tone. Qinshan chuckled. Lan Yu, did you use to coax share like this? She was really joking, but Lan Yu took it seriously. He was silent for a while before he said in a low voice, You're different from her. Cher, he could really raise a child. She gave him a warm feeling. However, Qinshan could make his blood boil, as if he would die if he didn't have her. He didn't tell her any of this, but only gave her a few more instructions. Qinshan put down his phone. She was deep in thought. Dating. She and Lan Yu should only be cohabiting right now. She likes his body, likes to have sex with him, but more than that, it seems not. It was just that when she was lonely, there was one more person accompanying her. Qinshan shrugged, feeling a little troubled. It wasn't that she couldn't see the desire in Lan Yu's eyes. He longed for stability, but she was destined to be a fleeting cloud. She might not be able to give him what he wanted, but he still hoped. She was in a daze, not realizing that she had spent too much time on Lan Yu. On the other side, Lan Yu put down his phone. He hadn't approved many documents in the afternoon and was a little distracted during the meeting. They were cohabiting, and he got to hug her as he wished, but the happiness and sweetness were like the moon in the water. It was fleeting. At 6:00 in the afternoon, Lan Yu returned to the Lan family's old house. He hadn't seen his parents for many days, and he was in a good mood, so his relationship with them was better. However, he didn't expect that his mother called him home for dinner because she had brought a girl for him. The girl had a good family background, was quiet, and was a university teacher. She wasn't old, about 28 years old. His mother's intention was very clear. Such a girl with excellent genes was a good match for him, and they could get married in half a year. Chapter 2747. He called her Miss Huang, and then the girl was a little surprised and called him Miss Lan. Blue Mother is a little worried. How can this kiss go on? Huang Xia has a very good impression of Lan Yu. It's not all yellow at last. Then it's his son's work. Originally, Blue Mother asked Lan Yu to send Miss Huang back, but Lan Yu asked the driver to send her back and said in a low voice, Mom, I have something to tell you. Blue Mother looked at him and didn't say anything. She just sent away her favorite daughter-in-law first. When the car drove away, Blue Mother's voice was tight. You were trying to embarrass other girls, aren't you? Lan Yu lit a cigarette in the dark. Didn't I send people away in a good voice? Sent away? Blue Mother discontentedly said. Has the next appointment been made? Lan Yu took the cigarette from his lips, looked at his mother, and said softly, Mom, I have someone I like. Is it the doctor who is neither male nor female? Blue Mother sneered and walked back home. I don't know where to get the things. She slapped the photos on the table. Lan Yu, look at yourself. You have become a joke with a man in your arms. Do you know how to write in those newspapers? Blue Mother sneered and walked back home. She didn't know where to get the things. Lan Yu stooped, picked up the photos, looked at them carefully, and laughed. It's a good shot. Blue Mother was so angry that her whole body was shaking. Is this the point? Otherwise? Which is the point? Lanyu laughs. Your future daughter-in-law looks good. Not the point. Then what is the point? Blue Mother cold voice. This is a man. Lanyu, are you sure you want to marry a man home? What about the incense of our blue family? And do you want to stand in the mall in the future? Blue Mother said, sneering. Or have you long been infected with the habit of the painter? Infected with that hobby? Lanyu's eyes moved to his mother's face. For a moment, he said slowly, Qin Shun is a woman. How could such a person be a woman? Do you think your mother is blind? Blue Mother's voice rose. How cannot believe it? Lanyu shook his head and smiled. I'll live with her. Whether she is a man or a woman, I know best. Blue Mother looked at him. Some can't believe it. After a long time, he probed again. Then has she undergone surgery? No surgery. It's natural, woman. Lanyu was amused. Blue Mother lunged for a moment, picked up the photos again one by one. In the end, he did find something different. Qin Shin didn't have an Adam's apple. It was impossible for a man to not have an Adam's apple. Then she was a real woman. However, the Blue Mother still disagreed. Cold voice. This is not a man or a woman. I will not accept her as the daughter-in-law of the Blue family. Lanyu said helplessly, Mom, she might not be willing. It's still too early. I'm the one chasing her. He was thick-skinned enough to move in with her. Blue Mother looked at her son's eyes and was very dissatisfied. For a long time, she said in a hoarse voice, How do you like this if you don't like anyone? She's beautiful. Lanyu's voice is very low. I like her very much. Blue Mother was stunned for a long time, then whispered, I don't agree. This kind of woman is restless. How can a woman who is safe make herself look like a man? This is 80% mentally unhealthy. Chapter 2748. Qin Shin's excellence, to be honest, is not comparable to a businessman like him or a person who could draw a few bad paintings. There are many people who appreciate her, and he is just one of them. In their relationship, he is the one who needs to look up to. He can't talk too much with his mother. Just because she doesn't agree doesn't mean he will give up. When Lanyu left, he said in a low voice, Mom, don't arrange these blind dates in the future, and don't miss these girls. I won't like them. Blue Mother's heart is angry, sitting on the sofa and ignoring him. Lanyu took the car key and walked out. Blue Mother's voice came from behind. Are you going to see her? We live together now. Lanyu turned his head and said, Mom, I'm serious. I want to be with her. Blue Mother's lips moved, but in the end, she didn't say anything. It wasn't until Lanyu's car started that she stood up and walked to the door. Lanyu's car made a turn and drove to her. He slid down the window and looked at his mother in the dark. His voice was low. You and Dad have a rest early, and I didn't mean to annoy you. Blue Mother's heart can't say the taste. Her son hasn't talked to himself so gently for a long time. Is it because he is in love? That's why it's so soft? A stiff smile appeared on her face. Okay, drive slowly. Lanyu's smile is very bright. Blue Mother watched his car drive away, returned to the living room, and sighed to Blue Father. Lanyu seems to be determined to be with that doctor. She took a newspaper and looked at it carefully. You see, only 24 years old, won so many awards, the appearance of a man, although good-looking but born like this, can you have children? Also, if you use a scalpel to cut bread, will you accidentally cut our blue universe in your dreams one day? Blue Mother said, and then a burst of worry. I still don't agree. This appearance will be laughed at by relatives in the future. You see, Lanyu is a gay outside. Father Lan held the tea and laughed. You worry too much. Just now, Lanyu himself said that it's his own wishful thinking. The young man hasn't agreed yet. It's a woman. Blue Mother glared at Blue Father. You see, we're all living together. Will you disagree with? Or else, you're too reckless. Mr. Lan smiled. I think it's better to raise him as a boy. Besides, there are a lot of trial marriages nowadays. You have to try to see if they are suitable, right? Besides, Lanyu isn't young anymore. His body will always have needs. Otherwise, would he be happy looking for you outside? Blue Mother stared at him again. Lanyu is now abnormal. all inherited from you, this old thing. Father Lon was silent for a while before saying, him being like this is better than before, with Lon Ting. Blue Mother is also silent. After a long time, she said worriedly, look again, Lon Yu said to woman. What if he's lying to us? Well, he says he's going to the United States to marry a man. It's too late for us to cry. As long as he's happy, it doesn't matter if he's a man. It's a big deal to adopt a child. Father Lon is very open-minded now. Blue Mother is so angry that she doesn't want to talk to him directly. Lon Yu drove around the streets of B City and finally decided to go home and make her a midnight snack. He went to the market to buy some seafood, put it in the trunk, and drove back to Qin Shin's apartment. It was just 10 o'clock. Qin Shin had already gone home. He was still wearing a shirt and trousers, sitting in front of the floor-to-ceiling window and playing the piano. Chapter 2749. It was exactly 10 o'clock, and Qin Shin had already returned home. She was still wearing a shirt and trousers, sitting in front of the French window and playing the piano. She played very well, and her fingers were slender and particularly pleasing to the eye. Lon Yu looked at the ingredients in his hands and suddenly felt that he was very vulgar. His mother's words came to his mind, and he felt that it was ironic. He had always been begging Qin Shin to give him a chance to kneel down and lick her boots. Just like now, he came home early like a dog to make supper for her. When Qin Shin heard the door open, she glanced at him and continued to play. Lon Yu also enjoyed it for a few minutes. In the end, Qin Shin put down the lid of the piano and smiled. Finished eating, Lon Yu grunted in acknowledgement. Qin Shin looked at him for a long time and then asked calmly, how was the blind date today? Lon Yu narrowed his eyes, looked at her, and said very slowly, you know? Qin Shin's tone became even more indifferent. Unfortunately, the girl named Huang Xia is a relative of mine. Lon Yu, your mother found a candidate for you, but it wasn't a good time. Lon Yu's expression didn't change. He put down the things in his hands, walked over, and hugged her from behind. He said in a low voice, you also said that it was my mother who found her, not my idea. I didn't know before I came home. Qin Shin sat there and didn't move. After a long time, he smiled faintly. Lon Yu, if you want to get married one day, you can tell me. His body trembled, and then he looked at her. He had a feeling that what she was going to say would not be what he wanted to hear. Sure enough, Qin Shin sighed. At that time, our relationship will be over. Lon Yu tightened his grip, and his thin lips pressed against her ear. Take back your words, In. Qin Shin looked down. Lon Yu, you're hurting me. He closed his eyes slightly. Qin Shin, do you feel pain too? Qin Shin's body trembled, but Lon Yu continued. You're omnipotent, like a god. I thought you wouldn't feel pain, and you wouldn't understand the pain of mortals. With that, he released her and turned towards the kitchen. Qin Shin's body relaxed, and he felt a sense of emptiness. She hadn't felt like this for a long time. Because she was Qin Shin, she didn't care about anything. In her world, there was only life and death. There was no separation between life and death. To her, life and death were things that had happened a long, long time ago. She turned her head and watched as Lon Yu made supper in the kitchen. He seemed to have a good temper, but Qin Shin knew in his heart that how could a man from such a family have a good temper? He was just accommodating her. When Qin Shin opened the lid and played the piano again, he was no longer in the same state of mind as before. After Lon Yu finished preparing supper, he called out to her and went to the balcony to smoke. Qin Shin walked over and looked at the supper he made. It was a seafood porridge, which looked, smelled, and looked good. She took a sip, and it tasted very good. She looked over, and Lon Yu happened to be looking in her direction. Qin Shin smiled faintly, and under his gaze, he finished the bowl of rice. Then, she looked at him and raised her eyebrows. Do you want to apologize, or please me? Lon Yu looked at her, and took a puff of his cigarette. Are you apologizing, or trying to please me? I didn't have dinner. Qin Shin supported his chin with one hand. After hearing the news, I was so angry that I couldn't eat. His gaze was a little deep. Then you're coaxing me. Chapter 2750. He put out the cigarette and walked over with the smell of cigarettes. He leaned over and kissed her lips. You know it. Qin Shun was still smiling faintly. Lan Yu bit her heavily with a strong sense of punishment. You little heartless thing. I really want to kill you. He had only made one bowl just now, and now he had to make another one. Fortunately, he really didn't have a temper in front of her, so he started to make another bowl. Qin Shun looked at his back and hugged him from behind. What do I have to do to not be angry? He was processing the ingredients. He paused for a moment before saying in a low voice, Qin Shun, our relationship has always had an extremely unfair beginning. I don't ask you to feel the same as me, but don't deny me so easily, okay? He wasn't made of steel, so he would also feel uncomfortable. She mumbled vaguely beside him. It seems that you're really hurt. Do you want me to make it up to you? Are you willing to wear a dress for once? Lan Yu's voice was a little hoarse. Qin Shun didn't even think about it. Change it. Lan Yu turned around and looked at her with a deep gaze. As a handsome man, there are few people who could be compared to him, but Qin Shun was indeed better looking than him. She was more exquisite. No matter how handsome Lan Yu was, there would always be times when he was rough. After all, he was a man in his 30s. But Qin Shun was different. She was always good-looking. He looked at her for a long time before saying, Go to my closet and choose that black shirt to wear. Deal. Qin Shun kissed him on the back and left to play the zither. Lan Yu's fingers touched his forehead. He found that he was too easy to talk to. He was easily pleased by her. However, he soon smiled and felt that there was a kind of faint sweetness. This was Qin Shun's mischievousness. Perhaps only he, Lan Yu, knew this side of her. She was a little tsundere, but very cute. Lan Yu made the seafood porridge and was about to call Qin Shun when he found that she was no longer at the piano. Thinking she had gone to the bathroom, he went to the bedroom to call for her. However, he didn't expect to see such a scene. His Qin Shun, from head to toe, was only wearing a black shirt. Black and white collided with his soul. Those straight and slender legs were challenging his nerves. Lan Yu's Adam's apple kept rolling. He looked at the beautiful scenery and his voice trembled slightly. Why did you wear just like that? He originally thought that there would be a pair of trousers underneath, but he didn't expect that Qin Shun would just put on a shirt. She wore his shirt, and it was 100 times sexier than a bathrobe. She usually dressed like this, but the black shirt that was 2 sizes too big on her made her look extremely slender. Moreover, she was a woman through and through. Lan Yu slowly walked over and hugged her from behind. Are you coaxing me to make me happy, huh? Qin Shun nodded. Are you happy? He lowered his head and kissed her neck. Very happy and pleased. His voice couldn't help but tremble. Qin Shun, you look very beautiful like this. Qin Shun frowned. Is it a little girly? No, it's very beautiful. Lan Yu held her waist, and his voice trembled with excitement. I'll draw you a picture. Qin Shun was stunned for a moment and then laughed. Chapter 2751. Paint first, then eat. Lan Yu picked her up and walked straight to the piano in the hall. He put her on the cover of the piano and unbuttoned 2 buttons for her with his slender fingers. It was slightly opened, revealing her beautiful collarbone. Qin Shun sat casually. Her long legs were very eye-catching, and she only wore a black shirt, which made her look very decadent. Not to mention how delicate her face was. Lan Yu kissed her forehead and said in a low voice, Be good. 1 hour will be enough. Qin Shun said lazily, Hurry up. I'll try my best. Lan Yu smiled slightly, but his eyes were full of turbulence. He had never had such a strong desire to create. It was Qin Shun who inspired him. At this moment, he felt that he was almost boiling. She was God's favorite, a work of art. Lan Yu took the sketchbook, but gave up after a while. He even ran out and bought materials for the oil painting, and Qin Shun sat on the piano for a full 5 hours. When he was done, it was also when her patience ran out. Qin Shun wanted to see it, but Lan Yu covered it with a cloth. He said with a smile, It's not done yet. I'll show you when it's done. When he looked at her eyes, there was a faint spark. Qin Shun leaned against the piano and smiled gently. I haven't had supper yet. Lan Yu went forward, hugged her body, and kissed her lips. It's cold. I'll make another one later. Then he carried her to the piano and began to unbutton her clothes with his slender fingers. His voice was very hot. Now it's time for supper. Qin didn't object. But soon, she was a little surprised. She lowered her head, looked at his black head, and kicked him. Her voice was a little muffled. Lan Yu. He comforted her in a low voice. Don't move, be good. He held her hands down, not allowed her to struggle, and he carefully admired this piece of art from the inside to the outside, over and over again. Lan Yu had never thought that he would be so abnormal. In the end, he was a little worried. Qin, am I abnormal? After the deed was done, he hugged Qin, his voice low and hoarse. Qin calmed himself down and poked him on the shoulder. Go make supper. I'm starving. It's almost dawn. Then, wearing only the black shirt, she yawned and walked towards the bedroom. It's more tiring than being on the operating table. After she left, Lan Yu took down the painting. His spirit was trembling. This was the pinnacle of his life. Anyone who understood this painting could see that there was a thick, unconcealable love in it. But he didn't dare to show it in front of her. So, he lied to her. Lan Yu pursed his lips, looked at it for a long time, carefully put it away, and then went to make supper for her. Of course, he also made one for himself. It was very exhausting for a man to do this. The next day, Qin woke up in the afternoon. Lan Yu went to the company in the morning, but he was very good and made curry rice for her. She only needed to heat it up. This was the biggest advantage that Qin felt was living with Lan Yu. Lan Yu's cooking skills were not just for show. After eating, she changed into a long shirt and trousers, went downstairs, and drove a white Bentley to the hospital. Just like before, the nurses looked at her with admiration and called her Dr. Qin. Chapter 2752. Qin just changed his white robe to check Zhou Chongwang, and the nurse outside came over. Dr. Qin, someone is looking for you. Qin nodded and looked at Qin Mu. He is very stable now. When the blood clot disappears, he will be much better. I mean, psychological. Qin Mu nodded and wanted to say something. Qin reached out and pinched her head. Don't think about it. Well? She gave Qin Mu a warm smile. I'll go out first. She thought that Lin Cece would want to stick to her. But what she didn't expect was that the one looking for her outside would be Lan Yu's mother. Qin looked at Blue Mother, walked over slowly, and asked in a low voice, What's the matter, Auntie? Her attitude was neither humble nor arrogant, but it was not too warm. Lan Yu's mother looked carefully and didn't see a woman's appearance. Qin looked at her expression and probably guessed what she was thinking, so he smiled lightly. Let's go to my office to talk. It's not convenient here. Such an attitude is very accommodating for a little tsundere like Qin. Blue Mother nodded angrily and followed Qin. After walking for a while, she was even angrier. Qin saw her future mother-in-law. Her attitude was so cold. She walked in front of her alone, and she didn't care about her behind her. Lan Yu was a diamond-level bachelor. Not only did he fall in love with this kind of girl, but he even gave her a hard time. Blue Mother's heart is angry, but there is no way. But when she got to the office, she couldn't help it. Qin is making coffee. She looks at Qin's beautiful movements, the set of expensive cups, and then looks around. It's luxurious. This is a hospital, not a hotel. I'm young, and I'm like this. Blue Mother couldn't help but say, I don't drink coffee. Qin didn't look up. His actions were very pleasing to the eye as he poured the coffee. I drank it myself. I slept a little late last night, so I don't feel very energetic. Blue Mother seems to have been touched. Lan Yu sleeps with you. After Qin poured it, he took a sip and gestured for Mother Lan to sit down. He said, Is it strange? Otherwise, why would it be called cohabitation? She said it very openly, but here in the Blue Mother, it is not acceptable. What does the little girl put cohabitation on her mouth? However, the word little girl was even more inappropriate for Qin. Blue Mother originally came with a mood of consent, but in this way, all kinds of dissatisfaction. At this moment, she remembered that this doctor was the quack doctor who tortured Lan Yu. He said that if Lan Yu was transferred to another hospital, Lan Yu would die. He was the sharp-tongued doctor. He was indeed good-looking, but his mouth was as venomous as what? What kind of tastes and hobbies did her son have? Unexpectedly, he fell in love with such a perverted doctor, neither man nor woman. Blue Mother's heart was very upset, and her voice was cold. I want you to break up with Lanyu. Qin Shen's hand holding the coffee cup stopped, and his eyes drooped. Okay. Blue Mother could hardly believe her ears. After a while, she hummed, You don't love Lanyu. I didn't say I loved him. Besides, Auntie, you asked me to break up with him. I said, well, is that wrong? Qin Shun chuckled. But your son has to move out of my house himself. Chapter 2753. After listening to Qin Shen's words, Blue Mother was angry. This girl didn't mean to tolerate herself at all. Instead, she had the upper hand everywhere. No, where's she like a woman? She's a man completely. It's hard for Blue Mother to imagine that her son will go to sleep with such a baby. Just think about the picture, it's drunk. Blue Mother's face turned into a pig liver color, but she couldn't help Qin Shun at all. For a moment, she looked at Qin Shun and tried to calm herself down. Half of her concession was also difficult. If you can return to the appearance of a girl, I can still consider accepting it. Qin Shen's mouth rose slightly. What? Unless you don't want to be with Lanyu. Blue Mother's voice is a little stern. Qin Shen chuckled softly. I don't need anyone else to decide what I am like. If it's to use my appearance to keep a man, then I won't do it, unless one day there's someone I'm willing to do it with. Then, she wanted to see off the guest, but as soon as she raised her eyes, she saw Lanyu. His black eyes, dyed with a layer of deep, had been watching her. Qin Shen smiles. Do you need time to communicate? Although she was smiling, there was no trace of smile in her eyes. Lanyu looked at his mother and said in a light tone, Mom, you go back first. Blue Mother naturally didn't want to. Lanyu, you heard what she said just now, didn't you? She doesn't want to be a woman for you, because you are not the one who makes her willing. Lanyu's tone is heavier. Mom, it's between me and her. Blue Mother looked at her son, with a touch of injury on her face. Lanyu, do you think your mother can no longer ask about your affairs? If she likes you, loves you, and can live a good life with you, my mother will not object, but Lanyu, my mother can't watch you sink deeper and deeper, and the last pain is you. I know what to do, Lanyu said calmly. Then, he glanced at Qin Shun, who didn't care. Also, the one called Huang. Something reply for me. Mother Lan was dissatisfied. I think he's fine. She's Qin Shen's relative. You want me to live with Qin Shun while going on a blind date with her? Lanyu looked at his mother. Mother Lan opened her mouth slightly in surprise. Then, she roughly understood that Qin Shun knew about what happened last night. But at the same time, he didn't really care. Blue Mother's heart was even more uncomfortable. Anyway, looking at Qin Shun vertically and horizontally was not pleasing to the eye. Most importantly, she felt that although Lanyu looked happy now, would he be happy in the future? Qin Shun didn't want to be a woman, and she didn't want to marry Lanyu, so she wouldn't have children in the future. How long can such a hot relationship last? In fact, it's not that Blue Mother is too harsh. As a mother, she still thinks about her son. In her heart, Qin Shun is not a woman suitable for being a wife. She and her husband have only one son left, Lanyu. How can they rest assured after 100 years? At last, Blue Mother took a meaningful look at Lanyu. You can do it yourself. Lanyu pursed his lower lip and sent her out. It took half an hour to come back, probably to persuade her mother. When Lanyu came back, Qin Shun was still sitting in the office drinking coffee, as if waiting for him. Chapter 2754. Qin Shen's gaze was very indifferent, just like when he first saw her. There was no emotion in his eyes, and even when he smiled, the smile didn't reach his eyes. At this moment, she looked at him, and his heart skipped a beat. He seemed to be able to feel her decision. After a moment, Qin Shun said calmly, Lanyu, move away. He frowned and looked at her quietly. Why? No reason. Qin Shun smiled. Didn't you hear it? You're not that person. I won't change for you. I can't be your ideal wife. Instead of letting you be disappointed in the end, it's better to... Before she could finish speaking, her body was held by him. He pressed her against the wall roughly and reached out to pinch her pretty chin. Qin, do you mean that you've always been playing with me? So when my mother came over, you pushed the boat and said that you wanted to separate. And whatever you think. Qin's voice continued to be cold. Lan Yu, take this as my last kindness. Your mother is right. Instead of making you sad in the end, it's better to separate now. Lan Yu stared at her delicate face. Last night, this beautiful little face had brought him endless joy, but at this moment, it made him grit his teeth and want to strangle her. He took a step back and looked at her. Qin, is that really what you think? She leaned her head against the wall and looked at him. If your idea is to marry me and make me your wife, we can stop here. If you don't try, you'll deny me. His fingers gently scratched her delicate face, and there was a hint of pain in his voice. Qin just looked at him calmly. Lan Yu, I'm a person without a heart. His palm suddenly grasped her heart. There's no heart here. Is it because you gave your heart to someone else? As he spoke, his eyes burned into her, not letting go of any expression on her face. Qin didn't evade either. She looked at him and said softly, You don't want to know? You gave him your heart. Then what about your body? You gave it to me. Are you pitying me, or are you toying with me? Lan Yu's fingers tightened. He narrowed his eyes and stared at her. Qin, tell me, will I always have shell? If it is, then I will let you go. Qin looked at Lan Yu for a long time before she slowly said, What do you want me to say? We made it clear from the beginning. I'll let you say it again. Lan Yu stared at her. Qin smiled faintly. She looked at Lan Yu and said word by word, Yes, it will always be. Lan Yu threw a punch over and heavily smashed the top of her head. After a loud sound, Qin seemed to be able to feel a wave of warmth that was Lan Yu's blood. It was also Lan Yu's right hand that was injured, his right hand that was drawing. Lan Yu. She pulled down his palm and looked at the injury at the joint. At this moment, the blood was still flowing. She didn't know if his muscles and bones were injured. She was shocked, and her voice was a little stern. Are you crazy? Yes. Lan Yu hugged her in his arms without a care. He didn't care about the injury on his hand and just hug her like that. He said softly, Qin, don't push me away. Chapter 2755. Suddenly, Lan Yu laughed. He looked at Qin and said, I'm always a patient to you, right? Just a patient, or should I say, a vegetable. You saved a vegetable and made love with you. Don't you feel a sense of accomplishment? Qin pursed his lips. Do you know what you're saying? She opened the drawer and took out some medicine and gauze to bandage his wound. Looking at him, it should be just a superficial wound. Lan Yu let her bandage him and did not apologize for what he said just now. When she was almost done, he suddenly said, I'll move the things away tonight. The things in Qin's hands fell on the desk. She seemed to have not expected him to be so straightforward. Lan Yu laughed at himself. I don't think it's interesting to be so shameless. Qin, if you're destined to fly high, then fly far away. Don't let me see you again, okay? Qin lowered his head and smiled after a long time. Okay, I will. I'll be on duty tonight. She hesitated for a moment before saying, Bring the key to me tomorrow, or mail it to me. Yes, it's better to mail it to me. There's no need to meet again. She looked at Lan Yu as if she wanted to say something. In the end, she did not say anything. Lan Yu did not say anything either. After she was done, he got up and walked to the door. When his fingers were on the doorknob, he paused and said softly, Qin, I thought I could warm up your heart no matter how cold it was. But I was wrong. It turns out that you don't have a heart. There was no sound behind him for a long time. Lan Yu could not help but turn his head. Qin was making coffee. Her every movement was elegant. Her expression was very calm, as if nothing had happened. It was as if he, Lan Yu, was insignificant in her heart. No, he was insignificant, a vegetable patient. Lan Yu thought self-deprecatingly. He opened the door and walked out without looking back. As for Qin, he glanced at the door indifferently and continued to make coffee. No one had ever known that she would only drink coffee when she was in a good or bad mood. At this moment, her mood was definitely not good. After brewing the coffee, he poured a cup for himself and smelled it. Instead of drinking it, he poured it away. She then brewed many cups for herself, but none of them were drinkable. They were all very bitter. Lanyu walked to the parking lot downstairs. To his surprise, his mother did not leave. She insisted on waiting for him there. Lanyu walked over and sighed. "Mom, why haven't you left yet?" Blue Mother looked at her son with a little worry. "I just want to ask you and Dr. Chin, what are your plans?" "I'm still going to say the same thing. If you're together, you must get married. Otherwise, that's it." Lanyu opened the car door and let his mother get in. He got into the car. Before starting the car, he said in a low voice, "She and I are separated." He laughed at himself a little. Between them, it's not even a breakup. At most, it's what she said, a bubble friend. Blue Mother was surprised and happy. Happy that her son broke up. Surprised. How could she break up? She was still a little uneasy. Did Mom come over and make you quarrel? Chapter 2756. Blue Mother looked at her son with concern. Personality is not compatible, so we can't get along anymore. Lanyu smiled bitterly. "I'll take you back first, and I have to go to the company later." Blue Mother's heart was always uneasy. She sat and looked at him. "Lanyu, I don't agree, but if you can persuade her, I'm not so against it." Lanyu was driving, and his eyebrows were full of depression. "Mom, it's none of your business. It's my problem with her." In fact, he knew very well that the problem between them was that he wanted it, and Shin didn't intend to give it. He smoked one cigarette after another, and Blue Mother was shocked to see this. Lanyu seems to like Shin very much. She can't understand, but her son is so unhappy, and she really can't be happy. When the car stopped at the blue house, she hesitated when she got off. "Lanyu, if you really can't leave that." "Dr. Chin, Mom can ask again, you're still together." Lanyu smiled. "Mom, it's okay, really." Blue Mother's expression is about to cry. Although her son said it was okay, she could see that he was very unhappy. Blue Mother still wanted to say something, but Lanyu had already got in the car and drove away. Lanyu didn't go back to the company, but went to Shin's apartment. He didn't bring many things. He threw some daily necessities directly into the garbage can downstairs. Then, with the remaining ingredients, he made a coffee paella for her and put it in the refrigerator. She could eat it as long as she came back. It's 4 o'clock in the afternoon. He stood in front of the French window, smoked 2 cigarettes, then pulled his suitcase and left the place where he lived for less than a week. He also took the painting with him. When Shin came back, it was 10:30 at night. It was dark in the big apartment. She reached out and touched the switch. Suddenly, it was as bright as day. The apartment was clean, and there was a smell of food in the air. She walked into the kitchen and looked at the paella in the fridge. Pursing her lips, she took out the paella and heated it up before eating it. After she cleaned up the dishes, there was no trace of Lanyu in the apartment. She walked to the French window and wanted to play a couple of songs. Unexpectedly, she saw 2 cigarette butts in the ashtray. One of them was half-smoked. It must have been left by Lanyu. She suddenly felt a little annoyed. Unconsciously, she picked up the cigarette butt and lit it up. He leaned in and took a deep breath. The smell was a little choking. She was still not used to smoking men's cigarettes, but she finished half of the cigarette. Smoking was loneliness. Standing in front of the floor-to-ceiling window was also loneliness. Even when she was playing the piano that was worth millions of yuan and looking at the night view of B City, she still felt lonely. Shin thought that maybe she should go back to New York. She played the song over and over again. Whenever she closed her eyes, she would see herself sitting on the piano and Lanyu drawing for her. She must be crazy. She put her hand down suddenly, and the music stopped. She covered her face with her hands and let out a long breath. She told herself that she was just used to it, used to having another person in the apartment, used to having someone to take care of her, someone to wait for her, someone to cook for her. So, it was better to be alone. She didn't need anyone else. She also didn't want to lose another person. Chapter 2757. Half an hour later, Shin had taken a shower and was holding a cup of coffee in her hand. Because she was a doctor, she almost didn't drink. She stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling window and looked out at the night view. lost in thought. Tonight, she allowed herself to be a little indulgent and sad. At this moment, the phone on the coffee table rang. She sipped on her coffee until she finished a cup, then slowly walked over. It was Lanyu. She thought about it and picked it up. Lanyu paused for a moment before saying in a hoarse voice, "There's food in the fridge." "Yeah, I've eaten," Chinchin said faintly. On the other end, Lanyu's voice was a little tense. "I've moved everything away. I won't disturb you anymore." He said it calmly, and to be honest, they hadn't even broken up. It could be considered very peaceful. Qin had never felt sad or uncomfortable, but at this moment, she wasn't used to it. She whispered, "That's good." Lanyu didn't say anything else, but he didn't put down the phone either. Qin waited for a long time before saying softly, "I'm hanging up." He stopped her. "Wait a minute." She waited for him in a rare good mood. Then, Lanyu seemed to hesitate for a moment before asking in a low voice, "In your heart, is it okay for me to be someone else's husband?" Qin was stunned for a moment, as if she hadn't expected him to say that. She hesitated for a moment before saying, "As long as you're happy." "What about you?" Lanyu asked softly. "Have you never thought about being happy?" Qin chuckled. "I'm fine the way I am now. I like this kind of life, Lanyu. We're destined to be people from different worlds. Forget it." She lowered her voice. "And I've never meant to play with you." Lanyu sighed softly and hung up the phone. Qin looked at the phone and pursed her beautiful lips. She looked at the night sky outside the window and felt that the whole world was quiet. It was very quiet, just like how she liked it. Night is black and her world is white. However, Lanyu's world was colorful. She couldn't walk into his world, and he wasn't willing to stay in her world either. Therefore, the two of them could not find a reason to be together. Qin stood in front of the French window for the whole night. She didn't realize that it wasn't that she wasn't used to it, but that she was already hurting for a man. The next day, when Qin went to the hospital, she had dark circles under her eyes. She purposely wore a pair of black-rimmed glasses, which made her look more refined. Wherever Dr. Qin went, there would always be scenery. The young nurses looked at her and smiled sweetly. Although Dr. Qin was AG, it didn't affect his image in their hearts. Because a person like Dr. Qin had transcended gender. He could be a man or a woman and would make people scream crazily. Qin smiled faintly and looked at the numbers in the elevator. A young nurse mustered up her courage and asked, "Dr. Qin, will you and Mr. Lanyu go abroad to get married?" Under Qin's gaze, she whispered timidly, "Foreign countries are much more tolerant of the same sex and will be legal. Besides, Mr. Lanyu used to live in New York, so he shouldn't be against living abroad." Chapter 2758. Qin raised her head again and looked at the elevator numbers. She said calmly, "We're separated. We're not together anymore." The nurses gasped and looked at each other. For a moment, they didn't know what to do. Then, they looked at Qin carefully. Looking at Dr. Qin's expression, he probably didn't want Lanyu anymore. A person like Dr. Qin was the one who dominated everything. Although, when they did that, Dr. Qin might be below. The nurses were all imagining things, and Qin was too lazy to explain or bother with them. The elevator door opened. She walked out directly and walked straight to her office. A few nurses whispered behind her. Dr. Qin broke up. "Does that mean we have a chance again?" Puffed. "Dr. Qin likes men. You don't mind Dr. Qin? And Lanyu doing that? Besides, what if there's a problem with Dr. Qin? After all, he's a sub." The Fujoshis chatted happily. Although Qin couldn't hear them, she could probably guess what others thought of her. She never cared, so she let them be. However, she didn't expect that in less than an hour, the news of her and Lanyu breaking up spread throughout the hospital. In fact, Miss Lin Cece also knew. Qin drank a cup of coffee and was about to go see Zhou Chongwang when a slender hand opened the office door. Then, he saw Lin Cece's little face. To be honest, Lin Cece was not bad looking, and her temperament was a bit like Su Cheng. Qin had a deep impression of Su Cheng. In addition to the fact that she was very close to Uncle Kaim, it was also because she had that kind of feeling toward his mother, Yiliangxiu. Lin Cece and Su Cheng had a small body, but he didn't know if their thoughts were the same. They were crazy. Qin Shen looked at Lin Cece indifferently. What's the matter? Lin Cece walked in and bent down to look at Qin Shen. You look good in glasses. A faint smile appeared on Qin Shen's face. Lin Cece, I don't like women. Lin Cece looked like she was shocked. She widened her eyes and looked at Qin Shen. Then she smiled. You like men? Qin Shen was silent for a while before saying, No, I like myself. He looked at Lin Cece. Have you heard of a Greek god? He was very narcissistic. He liked to look at himself in the sea. Lin Cece looked a little dazed. Qin Shen, you look good too. Qin Shen smiled and said, I mean, he won't fall in love with anyone else because you are what he likes the most. As he spoke, he stood up and leaned over to look at Lin Cece. Don't waste your time on me. Her attitude could not be considered good at all, because she wasn't in the mood to coax a little girl, even if her father was a powerful person. Lin Cece's little face looked a little hurt. Then, she let out a sweet smile. Qin Shen, you've misunderstood. I only came because I heard that you broke up with Lan Yu. What I wanted to say was, if you don't like him anymore, can I like him? Qin Shen was stunned for a moment. Then, he felt like fucking hell. Lin Cece smiled sweetly. If you don't like him, can I go after him? Qin Shen came back to his senses after a long time. Then, his voice became even colder. You can ask Lan Yu this question in person. Chapter 2759. Even a person like Qin Shen is defeated by her. What kind of logic is this? Is there something wrong with her brain? If there is something wrong with her, she must be treated. However, Qin Shen is too lazy to pay attention to her. If she really runs after Lan Yu, it will be Lan Yu's trouble, not hers. She changes into a white robe and looks at Lin Cece. I have to go to the war now. It's not convenient to talk to you. Lin Cece follows her very obediently. Dr. Qin, I'm going too. If she insists on following, Qin Shen can't drive her away. Because Lin Cece's father is a super big boss. No one here can afford to offend him, at least not easily. Although Qin Shen doesn't do business or politics, she always knows what to do. If this kind of thing is not handled well, the Qin family and the Tang family will have a hard time. If Lin Cece wants to follow, let her follow. However, when they walk to the VIP ward, Lin Cece becomes quiet. Because Mrs. Lin is standing there, watching them coming over, she slightly lowers her voice. Cece, go back to your room. Lin Cece is still a little afraid of her mother, so she obediently goes into the ward. Mrs. Lin has always been very fond of Qin Shen, so she talks with respect. She watches her daughter enter the ward, smiles at Qin Shen, and says helplessly, Cece has been spoiled by us since she was a child. She doesn't know what to do. Dr. Qin, please forgive her. It doesn't matter. Qin Shen is very generous. She'll be fine when she grows up. Madame Lin's face was full of worry. Cece was kidnapped when she was young. She was traumatized. After that, she stayed in the hospital for 2 years. That's why she has a special liking for doctors, especially doctors like Dr. Qin. In a few words, she also praises Qin Shen. Of course, Qin Shen doesn't think that Lady Qin said it casually, so he is not surprised and says lightly, Mrs. Lin, you flatter me. She looked around and said in a low voice, Madam should know about my sexual orientation, so for the sake of Miss Lin's happiness, it's better to restrain yourself. She even said very bluntly, I can't give her happiness. Madam Lin did have the intention to test him. Although there were rumors about Qin Shen and Lan Yu, many people were bisexual. To put it bluntly, they were bisexual. If it was the same for Qin Shen, it was not impossible for him to be with Cece after separating from Lan Yu. She thought that Dr. Qin's character was very good, but now that Qin Shen said it so firmly, she couldn't say anything more. Qin Shen said in a low voice, Madam, I'll be returning to New York soon. If Madam cares about Qin Shen's usefulness to the Lin family, please don't make things difficult for me. Madam Lin was also a woman. Although her husband was in a high position, she was not unreasonable. So she sighed softly. Okay, I will restrain Cece and won't make things difficult for Dr. Qin. Qin Shen is free. so he naturally won't mention anything about Lan Yu. After saying goodbye to Madame Lin, he walked to Zhou Chengwang's ward. Zhou Chengwang is much better. This guy's really tough. He survived such a big surgery and such a big injury. In fact, Qin Shun doesn't have 50% confidence, but now she can be sure that Zhou Chengwang can survive the rejection period. This man's desire to survive is simply the first time she saw it. Chapter 2760. The man who couldn't be seen was the most obedient. When Qin Mu was taking care of him, she could do whatever she wanted. Although Zhou Chengwang was helpless, there was nothing he could do about it. Sometimes when he fell asleep, he would dream that he was living in the hostel and the landlady was not dead yet. She was still wearing a cheongsam and swaying her body. The man was not dead either. She took something to mend something for him. The room was very hot and uncomfortable, and there was no Qin Mu there. Every time Zhou Chengwang dreamed, he would wake up sweating all over. Qin Mu would carefully wipe his body clean and change his clothes. He felt a little guilty. She was pregnant, but she still worked so hard. He asked the nurse to do it, but Qin Mu refused and said that she could do it. Zhou Chengwang felt that they had never been so close to each other before. He couldn't even see it, but they were even closer. Qin Mu didn't seem to be in a hurry. Once he asked her, what if he couldn't see it? She said, "It doesn't matter, Zhou Chengwang. I'll support you." Of course, this was just a joke. One glory was enough for him to eat for 10 lifetimes, and it could support her for 10 lifetimes. However, Qin Mu's words were full of unwillingness to leave him. Zhou Chengwang held Qin Mu's hand and said softly, Mu, have you found out anything?" He asked Qin Mu to find out the whereabouts of the beauty in the grocery store. At this time he asked. She reached out to hold his finger and said softly, "Not yet. She should be fine. Maybe she will be beaten, but she's also dead, isn't she?" Zhou Chengwang asked in a low voice. Qin Mu didn't answer, but just held his hand tightly. Thus, Zhou Chengwang knew the answer. He pursed his lips and said in a low voice, Mu, it's all a tragedy. I don't know if it's a woman's obsession, a man's, or the woman in the grocery store. This kind of story was very similar to him, Mu, and Gumei. He loved Mu, but he was entangled with Gumei. Fortunately, Mu was not as fragile as that woman. She chose to leave rather than die. Zhou Chengwang's fingers gently came over and touched Qin Mu. Mu, thank you for your persistence. Qin Mu blinked. I didn't insist. I left you and divorced you when I knew you were a playboy. If Zhou Chengwang could see it, he would definitely glare at Qin Mu fiercely. However, he couldn't see it, so he could only stare at the air. After a long time, a look of grievance appeared on his face. Thank you for being alive. Then, Zhou Zong got angry. He was really angry. Qin Shun stood at the door and watched with great interest. Zhou Chengwang was quite cute now. However, he didn't know if he would still look like a sick cat after he recovered, or if he would flirt with women again and play the role of a little star. However, even if she wanted to give him one more geniuses, he wouldn't dare to. Right now, Qin Mu was also very fierce. Qin Shun walked in and examined Zhou Chengwang. When he got up, he blinked and said slowly, "The owner of this liver is 24 years old, mixed Chinese and British. He looks very handsome in the photo and matches Qin Mu's age." Qin Shun smiled at Qin Mu and said, "There's finally something on Zhou Chengwang that matches you." Then she added, "The most important thing is that the mixed Chinese and British man is still a virgin. Of course, his liver is also a virgin's liver. Qin Mu, you've made a fortune." You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.